You want to hear something crazy? According to the World Health Organization, damage from antibiotics could cause 10 million deaths per year by 2050, surpassing cancer as a leading cause of death. In under 15 minutes, I'm going to teach you how infections don't spread to your heart, don't spread to your bone, to your brain, like we're told. And if they don't spread, then those antibiotics we've been told are life-saving, maybe they're actually just harmful, just as the WHO points to. We'll cover 5 things. 1, why misunderstanding this can cost you your health and life. 2, do bacteria spread to the brain and even kill babies? 3, how germ theory research just chases its tail. 4, my shocking conversation with ChatGPT. And 5, the big bacterial picture. Number 1, why misunderstanding this can cost you your health and life. People might ask, well, what if my sinus infection spreads to my brain? What if my dental infection spreads to my jaw or to my bone? My doctor tells me that this can happen if I don't take antibiotics. If you're new here, I've been in the business of natural healing for 14 years, healed myself from severe chronic symptoms after years of struggling. I've done thousands of consults now professionally with cases labeled as cancer, autoimmunity, gut issues, Lyme, and more. In my practice, I use a lot of drainage therapies. For example, colonics, enemas, nasal irrigation. These drainage therapies literally changed my life and my health, and so I use them frequently with people. But clients sometimes fear that using these, such as like a neti pot for cleansing the nose and sinuses, they fear that it'll cause the bad bacteria to spread to their brain and cause brain inflammation. Or they're afraid if they use an enema, what if they don't clean it well enough and they infect themselves with some bad bacteria? These are the fears that continue to hold people back from really resolving chronic issues because it stunts their ability to use methods that could be very, very helpful to them. The spread of infection is built on no sound evidence, and I'm going to show you exactly why. We've all heard the scary claims: eat the wrong food, and bacteria like Listeria can spread from your gut to your brain, to your liver, and even to an unborn baby. It sounds terrifying, doesn't it? This may not matter to you until the media tells you that the salad that you just picked up from the store could kill you or make your family seriously sick or cause a miscarriage if you're pregnant. How many times have we seen this in the news?
New tonight, if you recently bought spinach and lettuce from Publix, you may have to throw it out. The company Fresh Express issued a recall due to a potential health risk from Listeria.
Or what about your dentist who tells you that you need to take antibiotics because if not, again, it could spread and even kill you? See, really understanding this stuff matters not from a philosophical standpoint, but from a real world practical standpoint. What you believe or what you've been told to believe will dictate whether you end up taking those antibiotics or other harmful treatments. And I can tell you that those who take the antibiotics and the more and more antibiotics, which they're handed out like candy, have far worse health outcomes over time. These are the people I end up seeing. So it really, really matters. I even know some naturally minded friends and colleagues of mine who still pop antibiotics periodically, and they don't see the connection between their chronic conditions that they still find themselves in and the treatments that they're still using. They continue to blame their symptoms on an autoimmune condition or their chronic pain on it or their low energy on it. No, my friend, it's all the treatments you continue to put in your body. These drugs are some of the worst drugs in my opinion, and they can often lead to gut issues, metabolic issues, chronic pain, anxiety, depression, allergies, and ironically, they lead to even more acute sicknesses and more, quote, infections that they claim to treat. Okay, number 2, Exhibit A. Listeria spreads to the brain and kills babies? To understand why we believe these things, why we fear germs spreading, we have to go back to the very first studies that labeled certain bacteria as dangerous, deadly bacteria. Let's look at Listeria as one example. But please keep in mind, this will be the case when you go back and you look at all of these bacteria that have been labeled as dangerous and deadly. Well, we only have time to look at one bacteria. So Listeria it is. This is a great example because they continue to claim that this particular bacteria, as you may know, can spread to your brain and to your unborn baby. Now, this original study was done in the 1980s, and it's about an outbreak linked to some old coleslaw. They claimed they found how it was directly transmitted. But as we look at the study, there's an issue right off the bat. It's an epidemiological study. It was not an experimental study. Epidemiology cannot determine the cause of something, and this is well understood in the literature. This is why we have to do randomized trials and experimental studies to try to determine the cause and isolate variables as much as we can. If you look at this chart here, you'll see that there's several different types of studies. This chart compares a few of these studies, so you can really see the difference. You'll see that case control studies, which is what this original 1980s paper on Listeria is, cannot determine cause. Again, this is well understood. Okay, so in this epidemiological study, they looked at 7 adults and 34 babies. The infant cases were born to sick mothers who had a fever and were expressing symptoms. They treated everyone aggressively with antibiotics, including the babies. Only one infant eventually went on to develop meningitis after that antibiotic treatment. This is how they decided that bad bacteria can spread to the brain and cause meningitis, for example, even though there was no actual evidence of the bacteria being the cause. Again, this type of study cannot determine that, as it's not an experimental study. Also, we see that this microbe, Listeria, is found everywhere, as the authors point out that it's, quote, frequently isolated from soil, water, and vegetation, plants. What makes them think that a bacteria that's everywhere is the cause? They used a food survey to look back at what people remembered they ate to determine that the likely cause was, I guess, some old coleslaw with Listeria on it. But get this, initially when they first interviewed the participants, there was no connection between what they ate and them getting sick. They couldn't find any correlation there. So they decided to interview them a second time. After interviewing them a second time, they suddenly remembered, oh yes, we did eat the coleslaw. Almost half of the healthy controls, by the way, also remembered eating the coleslaw, yet they didn't get sick. That's how they decided that out of all the variables in the natural world, it was one particular microbe found on some old coleslaw that must have made some of these people ill. Even though the healthy controls who ate it didn't get sick, even though they didn't actually do any controlled experiment to determine if the Listeria was the cause of anyone getting sick, and even though they used heavy treatments such as antibiotics on all of the people and then blamed the side effects on the bacteria when in fact it could have been the treatment themselves. Ultimately, in this study, their conclusion was that, quote, the role of vegetables in Listeria epidemics needs further investigation. So you must understand, this is the type of study that all of this understanding of germs spreading and infection spreading is built on. Number 3, when the research chases its tail. Remember how I told you that everything you believe about germs causing disease and how they can spread in scary ways is due to these early original studies like the one I just pointed out? Well, you may be thinking, and hopefully you are, because it would be a smart thought, surely they did later experimental studies to determine that Listeria or other bacteria is the cause of these illnesses. Well, there are all kinds of papers written on Listeria, that's for sure, but none of them did this type of experimental study. All of them reference back to this original 1980s paper and claim that the cause was established then in this study. But of course, we know it wasn't. For example, like a recent 2024 paper in the Journal of Medical Microbiology, they claim that Listeria spreads from the gut to the brain, causing things like meningitis. But their so-called evidence, again, trace back to the same old 1980s coleslaw study. When you follow their citation, it leads to another 2022 paper that also circles back to the same coleslaw study. Listeria emerged as a human foodborne pathogen in 1981 following its identification as the cause of listeriosis in Canada, involving 7 adults and 34 children associated with consumption of contaminated coleslaw. So as you can see, clearly they just continue to cite the old studies with no appropriate evidence to claim that the bacteria is the cause at all. We're continuously told that a tooth infection spreads to the heart, A sinus infection spreads to the brain. But again, where's the evidence? Instead, what we have are lots of associations, not evidence of causation. For example, there are many things associated with various health conditions, but they are absolutely not the cause. Elevated white blood cells are associated with illness, but not the cause. A fever associated with disease, but not the cause. Elevated inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein associated with disease, but not the cause. Number 4, my shocking conversation with ChatGPT. The belief that bacteria spread and cause disease is built on a house of cards. So let's get into my conversation. Even ChatGPT confirms this, and when I asked about bacteria spreading in the body and for evidence of this, it wrote, quote, "Many claims about bacteria spreading are theoretical or based on the observation of secondary effects like inflammation or infection markers, rather than direct evidence of a single bacterial invasion traveling from one tissue to another." When I further pressed ChatGPT, it concluded that, quote, "The type of study you're describing has largely not been conducted in its purest form. The closest evidence comes from animal studies with artificial conditions or clinical observation of bacterial DNA in secondary sites. But if you're questioning the paradigm that bacteria spread and directly cause disease, it's worth noting that much of this framework is built on inferential science rather than definitive controlled studies." So there you have it. We have no direct evidence. We have no experimental evidence. We have no properly controlled evidence that these things, these microbes, cause disease or spread anywhere. What you have is a lot of secondary associations with these conditions. So then the question is, if it's not built on actual controlled experimental studies and quality evidence, why do we continue to allow this information to scare us? Number 5, the big bacterial picture. Bacteria are not villains. They're part of your body's natural response to damage or toxicity. Finding them in your gut, in your brain, or anywhere else doesn't mean they caused the disease or issue. Bacteria will be elevated in all kinds of conditions, and we know that when we look into the research repeatedly. They are merely found at the scene of injury, the scene of damage, or toxicity. Just like having more white blood cells are a consequence of something else going on, as we know. You wouldn't believe that, oh my goodness, the increased white blood cells in my urine might spread to my brain or cause meningitis. Yet this is no different than blaming bacteria. And if you still aren't sure, just note one final thing. There are actual treatments in conventional medicine using someone else's stool, their poo, and they transplant it into your colon via an enema, or people take it orally. They use this as a treatment for severe gut conditions. Now, if the paradigm of microbes causing disease were actually valid, this treatment wouldn't exist. It would be considered unethical and it wouldn't be helpful, which in some cases it does appear to be helpful. So what's the takeaway? People fear germ spreading, so they take antibiotics or do other harmful treatments because they fear that. They fear this because they heard it from their doctors and learned it in school. Yet, the doctors and teachers also learned it in school from the textbooks that cite these original papers that I covered here. But no one looks closely at those references cited. And when you do, you see there's actually no evidence for their bold positive claims. Then, and only then, you can begin to understand the true role of bacteria in our bodies. And most importantly, you can ditch the harmful treatments and start to heal and work within our natural biology.